Well, good afternoon, folks, and welcome back. Cumberland Outdoorsman with yet another one of my 22 Rimfire series videos. In today's video, I'm out here at my shooting range, and I'm going to be trying to answer a question that's occasionally asked of me, and I've heard it asked of others as well. Is it okay to dry fire your gun? In particular, dry firing a 22 Rimfire. Doesn't matter if it's a 22 long rifle, 22 Magnum, or many of the newer rimfires such as your 17 caliber rimfires. Here on the table I've got several different examples of rimfires and a centerfire to show you what I'm talking about. Now, what's the difference between a rimfire and a centerfire? I've never answered that question before, and for those of you that are new to the sport and that don't know, what we have here is a 38 caliber cartridge and a 22 long rifle cartridge. Both of these are rimmed. As you can see, there's a rim on this cartridge as there is on this 22, but if you look at the bottom, you can see that the primer here is in the center. So for this cartridge to go off, to be ignited, the firing pin has to hit the center of that cartridge. Hence, it's a center fire. With a rimfire, the priming mixture is distributed around the rim of the cartridge, inside. And the firing pin hits the edge of the cartridge, the rim of the cartridge. So it's called a rimfire. That's really the only difference between a center fire and a rimfire. Both of them have priming compound that ignites a powder charge inside the cartridge, and that forces the bullet out through the barrel and onward towards its target. Other than that, there's no difference. So, the question remains, should you actually be able to dry fire your gun, whether it's a center fire or a rim fire? Well, generally speaking, the general consensus is no. You should not dry fire your gun, especially if it's a rim fire. And quite often, it all depends on the make and the model and the design of that gun, whether it's safe to be able to dry fire it. What I mean by dry firing is having the hammer cocked back or the bolt in the firing position, whatever firearm you have, whether it's a pistol or a rifle, and then not having any cartridges loaded and then squeezing the trigger on an empty cartridge. That's dry firing, folks. Now, a lot of people like to practice with their guns by dry firing, and like I say, it all depends on whether or not your design is safe enough to be able to do that. What I mean by safe, will it damage the gun? It could either crack or break the firing pin, or it could damage the edge of the chamber where the cartridge is loaded into the chamber. Here I've got a 22 caliber rifle barrel, and as you can see, the chamber is recessed somewhat so that when the bolt closes, everything is even with the edge of the barrel or the edge of the chamber. When you load a cartridge in here, there you can see it's flush. Now, some barrels, the rim sticks out and there's a recess in the bolt itself, but either way it's enclosed so that the entire cartridge is contained, so that when the explosion happens, whenever that cartridge is fired, there is no brass exposed unnecessarily, so that the pressure from the gases actually blow the brass out. Everything is contained inside the barrel or the chamber or inside the bolt face, okay? But if you look closely at this barrel, you can see a small mark right there above the cartridge. And that's where the top of the firing pin struck the edge of the barrel or the chamber. And what that actually is, it's a safeguard so that if the gun is inadvertently dry fired, that the firing pin doesn't slam into the recess of the cartridge seat where the cartridge actually meets up with the chamber. That's a good design, folks. This is off of a Remington bolt action, and you know, it'll leave a little mark like that, but still there's a lot of stress on that firing pin because the cartridge is not there to cushion the blow as that firing pin is slammed forward. You know, that's quite a bit of pressure right there. And quite often I have replaced firing pins that were broken or cracked or somehow misshapen because they continually slammed into the edge of the chamber. And also I have had to re-chamber some 22s because the continued blow against the edge of the chamber there caused a burr, a metal burr, and the cartridge just simply would not feed anymore. It can also cause other problems such as very hard extraction, because as the cartridge expands during explosion, it expands into that burr and it just makes it really hard for that empty cartridge to be pulled out. Here I have a classic example of a 22 rimfire that's been continually abused by dry firing. Okay, this is an import, a fairly inexpensive gun. It's a single action revolver, and if you look at it closely here, you can see where the gun has been dry fired. And what's happened is it's dry fired to the point where there's a burr protruding on each one of the chambers that you can't even load a cartridge anymore. I get one of these cartridges and try to load it into the chamber and it just simply will not go. I'm pushing really hard and I can't get it in there. If I were to force that in there and then fire the gun, chances are I'd have to remove the cylinder and knock it out with a punch. Because of repeated dry firing, the firing pin has damaged the edge of the chamber. So in this case, is it safe to dry fire this gun? Absolutely not. So folks, what are we going to do with this old revolver? Are we just going to throw it away, just discard it because the chambers have been damaged by dry firing? Well, no. You know, if you know of a competent gunsmith and he has the proper tools, he can rechamber your 22 where it's been damaged by dry firing and get it back into functioning condition. And that's what we're going to do. We'll put it on half cock, remove the cylinder here, take the cylinder pin out, and we're going to rechamber. We're going to rechamber the cylinder with a chambering reamer. This is a match reamer for 22 rimfires, and by rechambering each of the cylinders, it'll bring the dimensions back where we can safely load the gun and be able to shoot it and also extract it. Now then, folks, there are some guns, some 22 rimfires, where it's perfectly safe to dry fire it if it inadvertently happens. You don't want to do it on purpose, but sometimes it happens when you're shooting. But quite often, you know, if it's a revolver like this Smith & Wesson Model 17, we see that the chambers are empty. Every now and then you'll be shooting and the cartridge has already gone off, and when you squeeze the trigger, the hammer is going to drop on an empty cartridge once again. So does it damage the gun? Absolutely not. There's no mark at all on that particular cylinder, which is this one right here that I just opened. And we'll test it. Here you can see cartridge goes right in very easily and is easily extracted. I mean, it just slips right out of there. So some 22 rimfires, it's perfectly safe for a dry fire event to happen. You know, even though it's done inadvertently, it's going to happen every now and then. and it's not going to damage the gun. Like I say, you don't want to sit there and just constantly dry fire with your gun, because it's not really necessary, folks. Now, if you train for target shooting or just trying to be a better shot with your rimfire or with your centerfire, it doesn't really matter. There are products available where you can safely do that without damaging your gun. Here are some of these snap caps made by Packmeyer. I just picked these up. These are for 22 rimfire. They make them in all different calibers. And if you've got a semi-automatic like this Ruger Mark IV that I've got here, you know, once you pull that bolt back, there's tension on that spring in there. And when you release that bolt forward, unless you pull that trigger, that hammer stays cocked. Hour after hour, day after day, month after month, and it's tension on that spring all the time. So in order to relieve the tension, the only thing you can do is squeeze the trigger. So how do you do that safely? You want to remove the magazine, and we'll take one of these snap caps, load it into the magazine, insert it in the gun, go ahead and load it with the snap cap, and you can go ahead and relieve the pressure on the gun to safely store it. Now, I know that that firing pin hit the back of that snap cap, and we'll take a look at it here. There you can see, right at the edge of that rim, that's what cushioned that firing pin. So, you know, if you want to dry fire, you can use a snap cap, and you can even use just a spent 22 cartridge if you want to. But there are products available so that you can safely take the pressure off of your prized rimfire. There are other models like this little Charter Arms 22 Pathfinder. This is in 22 long rifle, that are built pretty much the same as the Smith & Wesson Model 17 or the K22, where the cylinders are recessed, as you can see here. And I know for a fact that I've dry fired this gun many times on an empty cylinder or an already fired cartridge, and there's been no damage. And that's because as the firing pin travels forward, it's only allowed to go so far into that cartridge rim, and then it rebounds and comes back, and there's no interference between the firing pin and the edge of the chamber. So no damage whatsoever. I'll go ahead and load it and show you what I'm talking about. I'm going to go ahead and dry fire it. This is on an empty chamber. I know this gun is not loaded, okay? Okay, we'll mark that particular cylinder, which is the one right on top here. I loaded it with no problem whatsoever. Now, as I rotate that cylinder, it's going to go into the fire position. We'll go ahead and fire it. Now, if I had damaged that particular cylinder by dry firing it, I wouldn't be able to extract that cartridge very easily at all. But as you can see, it comes right out. No problem whatsoever. So to answer the question, should you dry fire your rimfire? Generally speaking, no, you should not, because there are other alternatives just like I just covered. But if it inadvertently happens, it all depends on the make and model of your particular rimfire, whether or not it's going to damage the gun. So let me go ahead and fix the cylinder on that one that I showed you that was damaged, and we'll see how well it functions. Okay, I've got them all reamed out here, and we'll go ahead and clean everything up with some of this Remington bore bright that I've got here. I've got an old worn out brush that I'm going to use on this. Clean out these cylinders. All right. Okay, you can see if you look really close where that firing pin damaged the edge of that chamber. And it created a burr inside each chamber. Okay. Now those burrs should be cleaned out now. And we should be able to load a cartridge just like that in each one. It should go in effortlessly. Well, now that I've got this cylinder repaired where I can load it and unload it once it's fired, I need to get another firing pin for this little 22 long rifle revolver, because the continued slamming into the end of the chamber has damaged the firing pin, folks. So looks like I'm going to have to find another firing pin for this old gun to get it back into shooting condition. So anyway, that'll be in a future video. About the only time that I can think of to legitimately dry fire any gun, especially a 22 rimfire, would be in the use of using those snap caps or a spent 22 cartridge. And the only reason you really want to do that is if you're training yourself out of a bad shooting habit, like slapping the trigger or not keeping the sights on target, or target panic. As a lot of you archers out there know what target panic is, it can carry right over into shooting a gun as well, where you're flinching just before you squeeze the trigger. You know, you're out here and you're trying to keep the sights on there, and for some reason you just cannot get the sight where you want it because you're anticipating the shot. Dry firing is a good, effective way to train yourself out of that bad habit. But if you do that, make sure you use those snap caps to keep from damaging your gun, even if it's a non-interference gun like this Smith & Wesson. The only other reason I can think of to dry fire a gun is to relieve the pressure from the mainspring, and in some cases the mainspring and the firing pin. But there are other ways of doing that without dry firing the gun. You know, you can use a spent 22 cartridge case if you don't have these snap caps. By the way, these are available in most local gun stores, so look around for them. Like I said, they come in different calibers, and I just picked these up for the purposes that I have, because I do some gunsmithing work and also to show you in this video. However, be warned, if you decide to use an empty cartridge case like this and you've just cleaned your gun, sometimes the brass, if it's left inside the barrel, inside the chamber, will react with certain chemicals like gun cleaning solvents, and it'll corrode that brass inside the chamber. And I've seen cases where I've had to remove old brass cases like this with a cleaning rod and then go in there and really scrub them out to get that corrosion out of the barrel, you know. So be warned about that. Really the safest way to do it is to get some of these snap caps, because that plastic will not react. Now, my friends, if you want to relieve the pressure on your gun on the mainspring, without using snap caps or a spent 22 cartridge. There are a few ways you can do it depending on what type of gun you have. Here I've got a Remington bolt action. Now this will work on other brands as well, Winchester, Savage, Marlin, you name it. What you want to do is make sure, first of all, that the gun is unloaded, okay? Put the safety in the fire position, close the bolt. Now, raise the bolt handle like that and hold it firmly with one hand, squeeze the trigger with the other, and just ease it down. Now all of the tension that would have been on that mainspring is relieved. The gun is in a relaxed position. After you clean it, you can do that and you can safely store it, and you can leave it like that for many years at a time and not have to worry about any fatigue on the mainspring tension. Here I've got an old pump action, a Remington model 121. This dates back to the 1930s, I guess, and a lot of these old guns were left cocked like that with an empty chamber for months and even years at a time. You know, the only time that they had the tension relieved on that mainspring is after they were fired, and then temporarily, you know, only for a short period of time until they were reloaded. Well, if you want to store your gun away with all the tension off of that mainspring, all you have to do is click the safety off. Of course, make sure that the gun is unloaded. And if you look closely there, you can see the ejector claw. You want to come back about that far, squeeze the trigger, and relieve the tension on that bolt. That hammer hit the bottom of that bolt, and then as I eased it forward, the tension was slowly released on the firing pin. It didn't slam into the back of the chamber, okay? And I've replaced firing pins on these old guns before because people have closed them and dry fired them. And on these, the firing pin, you know, it hits that edge of that chamber pretty hard. In fact, that's 2 or 3 of them now that I've replaced on this and an old Model 12. In each case, the firing pin was broken in half. If you've got a semi-automatic, like this Speedmaster, for example, you can also relieve the tension on that hammer spring back here, the mainspring. All you have to do, first of all, is make sure that the gun is unloaded. Pull down on the bolt handle just a little bit. It's on the opposite side on these Speedmasters. Pull down on it about the thickness of a nickel or so. Flip the safety off. Now if you watch my finger, you'll see the tension of that hammer as it pushes the bolt forward. You saw my finger move just a little bit. What that did is it cushioned it enough to where that firing pin wouldn't slam into the back of that chamber and cause any undue damage. You can do this with other semi-automatic rifles, such as the Marlin Model 60, the Winchester Model 190, so many others. You know, you can do the same thing. But this is also true for centerfire rifles and some handguns. Well, everything I've talked about up to this point is pertaining to either rifles or pistols, but the same can be also said about shotguns. You know, there are thousands and thousands of shotguns that are put away each year with the hammer cocked fully back with all that tension on that mainspring, you know, and they're put away in closets month after month, year after year. Sooner or later, that spring is going to get some fatigue on it and it's not going to work properly. You'll get light primer strikes and failures to fire. And I've replaced enough of them to know. You know, it's something that a lot of guys don't think about. You think, well, cleaning the gun and wiping it down, make sure it doesn't get rust on it, that's good enough. Remember, the gun can only function if everything is as it should be. In other words, if the mainspring has enough tension on it, if the firing pin hits with enough force to ignite that cartridge, if the bolts lock good and tight, you know, to get it in full battery position, everything has to work together. If you've got a worn or fatigued part, the gun could fail. And, you know, I've replaced enough of them to know. But like I said, a lot of guys don't think about that. You know, there's untold thousands of guns, like I said, that are put away each year after the hunting season's closed or whatever, and they're left cocked until next year, you know, and then they wonder why they don't work. And this is in direct relation to dry firing. You know, they think, well, if I dry fire the gun, I can get all the tension off of the mainspring. And at the same time, they may have broken the firing pin or done some kind of undue damage to the gun that they don't even know about yet until the moment of truth arrives. And then the gun doesn't work right. So remember this, folks. You know, this is just the reason I do this, is because I try to give you a little bit more insight on this so as to save you some trouble and maybe even some money from an expensive gunsmith build. So relieve the tension on your guns before you put them away. Here's a little 243 that I've got. This is a centerfire, not a rimfire, but even on these centerfires, quite often they're cleaned, no cartridges present, they're unloaded and cleaned. They close them, put the safety on, and then they put them in a closet until next year when deer season comes around. That mainspring stays cocked for months and months at a time, and sometimes for years. You know, say you don't want to use this gun, you bought another one, and one day you decide to use this one again, and the gun's not working because you're getting light primer strikes, hang fires, things like that, you know, and it's because you've got a worn mainspring. Real easy. Just like that other little bolt action 22 I showed you. Flip the safety off, raise the bolt handle up, squeeze the trigger, and just ease it down. That's it. The gun's clean, it's oiled down, all the tension is off the mainspring. Now you can put it away, and you can rest assured that this rifle's going to work perfectly the next time you get ready to use it. So remember that, folks. Take it from me, I know, and you can ask some other gunsmiths out there that have replaced mainsprings in the past. It's something that doesn't come up too often, but it's something worth thinking about, and that's the reason I included it in this video, because it directly relates to dry firing. So keep that in mind, but also keep this in mind. If you like to go hunting, fishing, camping, shooting, hiking, whatever your outdoor pursuit happens to be, I hope you enjoy it as much as I do. And until next time, make sure you hit that like button, hit the bell icon, and subscribe. That way you'll know when videos like this one will be coming your way. So get out there and enjoy the great outdoors, and if you go hunting or shooting, make sure you do it safely. I'll see you.